With Justin Jefferson extended, who's next to receive a contract extension from the Minnesota Vikings? We know that the future is going to be surrounded by Justin Jefferson, Dallas Turner, JJ McCarthy. The Vikings made their plans very clear when they extended Jefferson and throughout the draft in the offseason. But now, how do we piece things around those core parts? What do the Vikings choose to do with all that extra cap space? Because as great as cap space is to have, you got to spend it eventually. So let's take a look at some players who could be up for an extension and what those extensions might look like. Plus, we'll touch on the Kirk Cousins tampering thing because we haven't had a chance to talk about it yet since the ruling came out. Welcome to the Real Forno Show.
Welcome to the Real Forno Show, hosted by Tyler Forness, publisher at The Sporting News, contributor on SKOL North's Purple Daily, publisher of Substack Run In Shooter, the host of The Good, The Bad, and The Hungry on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network, and a founding member of Vikings First and SKOL.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Real Forno Show. I'm your host, Tyler Forness. With me, as always, is producer Dave. And Dave, I have to apologize. I was tampering with another podcast network earlier this week, and
Really?
I got in big trouble. In really big trouble. I got stripped of a fifth-round pick and fined $300,000. Oh, wait, that wasn't me. That was the Atlanta Falcons. So let's talk about this from a realistic point of view. The Vikings were never going to get a pick directly from the National Football League. There had been no precedent set. And when teams had gotten draft pick compensation back, here's how it happened. The teams, it was essentially like you hear people settling out of court. When the Philadelphia Eagles made that draft pick swap with the Arizona Cardinals, they settled out of court. The Cardinals didn't get punished by the league because the league accepted the settlement. Same with the San Francisco 49ers and Chicago Bears involving Lance Briggs. I believe that was 2008. So that's a key thing. They settled out of court. The Vikings did not settle with the Atlanta Falcons. The Falcons got punishment levied to them by the National Football League. Whether we think that's fair or not, it's at least precedent. So the NFL followed their own precedent based on how they levied the punishment. How they didn't follow precedent was the fact that they levied a really weak punishment. And it's really frustrating to see on a large scale how the NFL just kind of levies punishments however they see fit. Credit to Mike Florio, who really pushed the NFL in trying to get more information about it. They didn't answer his phone call, but they did answer via email a few questions. And I think one of the questions, Dave, was very interesting. He asked specifically about the Philadelphia Eagles and Jeremy Maclin and Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs were found to have tampered with Jeremy Maclin in 2013, and the Chiefs were stripped of a third-round pick and a sixth-round pick the following year. So they were stripped of significant draft assets. Well, the NFL had said, well, they talked to these players during the legal tampering period, and they said the Chiefs did not. That's not true. And the NFL's statement, according to Mike Florio, regarding that specific matter was that the Chiefs had contacted Maclin during the legal tampering period. So they're not even levying equal punishment based on their own precedent. And it's just very frustrating. Now, there's also the part where everybody tampers to the combine. Sure. But this isn't like general managers talking to agents at the combine. Like the Vikings talked with Kirk's agent, Mike McCartney, who represents many other players. Well, then you just be like, oh, we're done talking about Kirk. Okay, well, what about this guy? Like, that's kind of the tampering stuff that we get. It's you almost use like a front of something else to start the conversation, and then you divert it in the way that you want to be able to maximize your own business, which, look, I'm not against it. I think it's a smart play by these general managers and front offices to do everything you can to maximize your rosters and to maximize what you have going on. But the frustrating part is, like, they did it with 3 guys during the legal tampering period. 3. And they got less punishment than the Kansas City Chiefs got for tampering with one guy during the same time period. To me, it's just a bunch of crap. I don't even care that the Vikings were involved here. To me, that's a non-factor. The Vikings weren't going to re-sign Kirk Cousins, and they weren't going to re-sign him. And I think it was Luke Braun on the Minnesota Football Party earlier today. I'm going to give credit to one of those guys. It was Luke or Arif. Said that, look, the Vikings weren't going to end up bringing back Cousins because they told him, we're drafting a quarterback in the first round. That's our goal, is to draft your successor. That's why Kirk didn't come back. It wasn't because of tampering. So I'm not mad from a Vikings perspective per se. I'm mad from the NFL just talking out of their butts. And one of the biggest areas where they've talked out of their butts, Dave, is when it comes to like stuff like domestic violence, where they say they mean business. And until they implemented the policies post Ray Rice video, they really didn't. They were very laissez-faire about it. And it was very frustrating to see that kind of stuff just kind of thrown to the wayside. Ray Rice got a 2-game suspension. Then the video came out and he was blacklisted for life. Why? My personal opinion is the NFL knew that the video existed and they wanted to hide it because Ray Rice is a good football player. That's just an opinion. That is not factual. That has not been researched. It would not shock me if the NFL had the video earlier and they just wanted to keep it under wraps. Because if you then suspend him a second time after you receive the video, well, now you have to explain to everybody why. And you don't want the video coming out because it's a stain on your league, whether you kick the guy out or not. So the NFL just does whatever it wants. They say whatever they want. They're not consistent. And it's just very disheartening and frustrating. All I want is consistency. If you are going to penalize the Kansas City Chiefs, a 3rd and a 6th round pick for tampering in the legal tampering period for just one player. Now, Jeremy Maclin was a good player. He was not as good as Kirk Cousins is. And then the Atlanta Falcons do it with 1, 2, 3 players. And you're only going to level a 5th round pick. Because to me, the fines don't matter. $50,000 for a general manager, Dave, is like me telling you owe me a $40 bottle of bourbon. That's not that much money. And $250,000 for Arthur Blank? Arthur Blank could walk to one of his Home Depots and say, hey, give me $250,000, and it wouldn't even matter. Like, that dude has so much money. $250,000 is nothing. So the inconsistency in how they police themselves, to me, is the most frustrating part. And it's why I'm as upset about this as I am. I don't even necessarily care that they tampered with Kirk. They blatantly admitted it through Kirk Cousins. And then they got found to have done it 2 more times. And then they got punished so weak. It just all stinks. I hate it.
It does. It very much. We talked about it yesterday on Two Old Bloggers. If you're a Vikings fan, just take for granted the Vikes are going to get hosed on any sort of deal with New York and the front office of the NFL. And if it happens that we come out on the plus side, be pleasantly surprised, because it doesn't happen. There are favored teams in the NFL. It happens that the Falcons are one of them, because we know Arthur Blank's on the competition committee. All that sort of stuff happens. It's not Arthur Blank. It's Rich McKay. I believe he's the president of the Falcons. Yep. And which, I mean, he's basically the liaison for Arthur Blank. So you're not wrong. And the competition committee is the one that makes up the rules. Part of the rules is about tampering. Obviously violated it, but I knew from the beginning I didn't expect anything to come for the Vikings. That's nothing. And they got their wrists slapped. Whoop. Big whoop. Couch changed for fines. It's until they change the rules to specifically say what it is, even if it's logistics people talking about, hey, what size tennis shoe do you wear? Or whatever it was, it needs to be, it will we will continue seeing decisions out of New York that way because they do it each one on an individual basis. And there needs to be more set rules so it's not so individual. And whether it be Ray Rice, like you talked about, however all that stuff works out, it needs, and there should be some leeway, but there needs to be some firm, you do this, this is what the results are. And there isn't. Now, you were on this weekend on Purple Access with Judd Zolgad on Purple Daily Show. Judd had a great idea on how to solve this. He had two of them. One I like a whole lot, and that was move the legal tampering period up to the combine. It's happening there anyways, right? But I'm afraid if you do that, it's going to go all the way up to the senior games, down in Mobile and in Dallas. But his other idea is give negotiating rights, trade for negotiating rights. Have, Atlanta say, all right, we'll give you a fifth or a sixth so that we can talk to Kirk Cousins as soon as the season's over. And the league year's over. And I'm or not the league year, but the season, the Super Bowl's been played. We want to negotiate with him. Here's a 6th-round pick. We now have exclusive rights. And he's taking this from the NHL, that they could have exclusive rights to negotiate all the way up until the new league year. And it's the new league year and the legal tampering period as it sets now, the 2 days before the new league year, where other teams can jump in at that point. But if a team knows that's where they're going, and Atlanta did, because we both heard rumors that they were talking while last season was still going on, and he was sitting there with his popped Achilles, at least you get something out of it that way. I would like to see that happen, but it probably won't.
Yeah. So I think it's really interesting when you talk about the whole tampering thing. So I want to relate it to another sport, the NBA. The NBA has a moratorium on when you can sign contracts, but it's like you can discuss with players and contracts. I think it's for about 7 days, and then they can sign them. So the most famous example is the Dallas Mavericks had DeAndre Jordan agreed to a contract, ready to sign it, and then he got, I don't know if bullied's the right word, but he got pressured to go back to the Clippers, and he did. So nothing's ever perfect per se, but I do find it really interesting that you could have that kind of moratorium where you can talk to whoever you want, but you can't sign them. I think that's an interesting idea. I think it's an interesting element to add to this discussion. And I loved the idea of trade for rights. I'm surprised that teams haven't tried to explore it, especially with super high-end free agents. And then you could have conditions on those. So if you sign, hey, we're going to give you a 5th-round pick if he ends up signing with us. Or if he doesn't sign, like the Cam Akers trade, then you don't give up anything at all, or you give up significantly less. Maybe it's a 7th-round pick swap. I think that's a really interesting idea. And Judd wrote about it for me at the Sporting News. So I recommend you go check that out. This whole trade discussion just stinks because everybody tampers, and I'm fine with everybody tampering and how they're tampering. Whatever. If you want to talk to agents at the combine, sure. That you can't control talking to agents. Whatever. To me, that's a nothing burger. It's everything else that just drives me bonkers, and how the NFL just kind of just ignores it because it's just beneficial for them. This is why not having state-run media is a good thing. Why people like Mike Florio, who comes off for lack of a better term, a jackass. He's a really good guy. He's just very passionate about what he does, and he knows how to stir the pot. But he's a good human. And that's why, NFL Network, you don't want to necessarily go to NFL Network because they're going to put their own spin on it. And if ESPN buys NFL Network, it's it's going to be bad for business. Very bad. But we'll talk about that when it comes to it. But you're here to talk about.
I'm hoping that Apple buys ESPN.
You know what I hope, Dave? I hope they give us a lot of money to do our show for them. That's what I hope.
That'd be great.
That'd be great. Hey, Omaha Productions, we're available. Just let us know. All right, we're going to talk about some contract extensions. And we know Justin Jefferson got his. The Vikings, I am currently projecting them to have over $75 million in cap space next year. That is not including any potential rollover for this year. So if the Vikings have as much as I think they're going to have, which is going to be about $15 million, looking at about $90 million in cap space before extending guys like Darrisaw, Cam Bynum, Byron Murphy Jr. They're all free agents, by the way. And that matters. That matters to the whole discussion, because if you're losing out on 3 players like that, those could be $25 million in contracts. So, okay, you're at $65 million. That's still a lot of money to play with. So let's try and figure out, okay, if the Vikings want to make and offer some extensions, what could those look like? Would it make sense within the confines of the salary cap and how they're trying to build this team to make that happen? And I find it interesting on how they're building this team. And I really want to figure out what they're going to do on defensive line, because I don't think that they're ignoring it. I just think that they're prioritizing other things first, and then they're going to go hard on the defensive line to really fix that. And I think with how Brian Flores wants to attack on defense, I think they can get away with having a subpar defensive line for the time being. That's my theory. Now, will it work? Who knows? I mean, it worked pretty well last year. 13th in total defense, 17th in scoring defense. Those are good numbers with a really bad defensive line. So maybe there's something to it. Maybe there's something we just don't know. But we'll find that out. So let's talk some contracts, Dave. I am going to talk about multiple different players here today, because I think there are 6 players who make sense for a contract extension. We're going to start with the big one off the top, Christian Darrisaw. Now, the idea with extending Christian Darrisaw now is to prevent him from making more money down the line, and him becoming more expensive. Not preventing in, hey, we want to be cheapskates. It's just smart business practice. If you would have been able to agree to that contract with Justin Jefferson last year, you're saving about $6-7 million a year. Now, that's not necessarily the fault of the Vikings. Jefferson didn't want to sign. He wanted to wait it out. And he ended up being right. He got hurt and was still dominant and put up historic numbers. So it's hard to say that it was a bad decision for Jefferson, but it's worth noting that if you get hurt, it can completely cripple your ability to get that extension, which is why Penei Sewell just signed his extension. 4 years, $112 million, $28 million average annual value, only $42.98 million in guarantees, a paltry 38.4% of it guaranteed. Now, some of the total guarantees can be a little skewed because of when things vest. Okay? So on the 3rd day of the 2025 league year, $19.9 million becomes guaranteed in 2026. On the 3rd day of the 2026 league year, $12.1 million becomes fully guaranteed, with an additional $10 million becoming guaranteed on the 3rd day of the 2027 league year. So it's rolling guarantees versus fully guaranteed at signing, which it can be beneficial for an organization that's a little bit cash poor. And the Lions, I don't necessarily consider them cash poor, but they did sign Jared Goff and Amon-Ra St. Brown to market level contract extensions. That is massive. Okay, I want to address this because I think this is interesting. Daniel Thaw, I remember people wanting to trade Darrisaw during the draft. I would have traded Darrisaw during the draft if you gave me 2 first-round picks. One of them was in position to grab one of the top 3 tackles. I would have done that, because I think Christian Darrisaw is worth 2 first-round picks, and this was a historically great tackle draft. So if somebody wants to give me that type of currency for Darrisaw, I would consider it because of what you're looking at for the future of your salary cap. Now, I think Darrisaw I think I had him as a better prospect than all of the offensive linemen I graded this year. So
Heck, he's better than all tackles in the league except for one or two.
yeah, he's a phenomenal player. And I think if you get enough, here, let's look at it. Offensive tackle, because I have a master list. Penei Sewell is my number 2 ranked player ever in my time doing this. Only behind Trevor Lawrence. Christian Darrisaw is my number 2 ranked tackle. A full half a point above Amarius Mims. Now, if you got a haul, you have to consider it. You have to think about it. Like, he's very good. But the one interesting thing about offensive line is it's for better or worse, it's not about how great one guy is. It's about having nobody that sucks. If everybody's at a certain level, that's more important than having a dominant force. Unless that dominant force is just so good. But even like Quentin Nelson can't do everything for that Colts offensive line. They needed other dudes and they got other dudes. Larry Allen wasn't everything for that Dallas Cowboys offensive line. They had good dudes across it. So I think there's elements to it. But if you gave me enough of a haul, I would have absolutely considered trading Darrisaw. Now
you said he's a free agent next year. He is not a free agent next year.
He'll be a free agent after the 2025 season because
we picked up his 5th-year option. He's scheduled to make a little over $16 million in 2025.
But by trading him, you would only ensue a dead cap hit of, I believe, a couple $1 million because of what his signing bonus was and the prorated. So if you really believed in that tackle class, which I did, I loved the tackle class. If I got Amarius Mims there and I got another first-round pick to play with, like let's say it's next year, I would have really considered it. I don't know if I would have pulled the trigger because Darrisaw's that good. But considering how much I liked the tackle class, it's an interesting discussion. But just begging to trade him, no, you need the haul. He's that good. You need the haul. And you need to be in position to take one of those elite guys. That's the big thing. Yes, Delton, we can, as you said, franchise tag that ass. We absolutely can. So I think a contract discussion for Christian Darrisaw starts in the neighborhood of $25 million a year. That's where Laramie Tunsil, who is arguably better than Christian Darrisaw, currently sits. He signed a 3-year, $75 million deal a couple years back after signing a 3-year, $60 million deal a couple years before that. He has chosen the Kirk Cousins route where he wants the shorter term deals. He's not getting them fully guaranteed, but he keeps cashing in because he keeps playing that well. And he's been a godsend for the Houston Texans at that left tackle spot. Andrew Thomas, a little bit more inconsistent, especially early. Early, it did not look like he was going to be a good football player. He turned into one of the best tackles. Some believe Thomas is better than Christian Darrisaw. When healthy, I think it's a discussion. Problem was, he was barely healthy at all last year. He signed a 5-year deal worth $117.5 million, $23.5 million average annual value, 67 of it fully guaranteed, 57%. Now, Laramie Tunsil's 3-year deal, $50 million of it was guaranteed, 2/3. Okay. So Penei Sewell in functional guarantees has around 70% of it fully guaranteed. I don't have that exact number, but because it's a rolling guarantee, and if you cut him early, you're going to endure this massive dead cap hit anyways. It's essentially a full guarantee. It just makes it easier for escrow purposes for the franchise, and it helps a little bit for planning on those purposes. Back end stuff that we don't think about. So I think if Darrisaw were to sign an extension, it would be between that $25 and $28 million range. I don't think he eclipses a Sewell. The only reason why I think he might is because Darrisaw is a left tackle and Sewell is a right tackle. Now, Sewell can play left. He played left in college, and it is a 19-year-old freshman. He was mauling dudes. Like, this is a hell of a football player. But Darrisaw has not proven to be as consistent or as talented as Sewell, and that matters. I think he'll end up with, they'll probably want to sign him to a 4 or 5 year deal. I think $26 million is probably the sweet spot, Dave. And of that, probably 60% of it guaranteed. So you're talking 4 years, $104 million, or 5 years, $130 million. Both massive contracts. Both would be well deserved. But that's kind of where I think he falls in based on kind of looking at other contracts, how they're structured. And it would also have the Vikings with 2 top 15 tackles as far as the pay scale. Because right now, Brian O'Neill's 12th. And his contract is another one of those rolling guarantee deals because only $24.4 million of it was guaranteed at signing. Rolling guarantees are a real thing. And that's why it's always important to look at the structure of a contract before you freak out about what the contract actually is. Structure matters. All right. So let's go to the next player. And it's going to be a contentious one, Dave. Garrett Bradbury. Ooh. It's contentious just thinking about it, right? Garrett Bradbury, not exactly a stud football player. He's the 12th highest paid center in football. Can you believe that? $5.25 million a year. Sorry, tied for 11th. He's not getting that much money. $5.25 million on average for Garrett Bradbury, I think is fine. I don't think he's great. I also don't think he's bad. He's a solid player. And I think Alec Lewis of The Athletic, Dave, and I think this is where it'll make a lot more sense to people why you would extend Bradbury. That center relationship with a quarterback is extremely important. Having continuity at the position matters a lot. So I think bringing back Bradbury, and he's got 2 years left on his deal, so you don't even have to do it now. So I also don't think you pay him a ton. I think you maybe up the guarantees a little bit percentage-wise, because of his deal, 32.7% was fully guaranteed. He signed a 3-year, $15.75 million deal before 2023, and I thought he was fine. Now, one of the reasons why you might extend him is to add a couple more years to that deal to get that kind of security. Maybe you up the total. So I would guess 2-year extension worth around $16 million to up that average annual value closer to $7 million over the course of the final 4 years. And then of that new money, $16 million, you guarantee 9 of it. And I don't even necessarily think that it's bad, a good idea or a bad idea. I think it's an interesting one. And Jordan in the comments says 16.9. I'm guessing you're talking about PFF grade is solid. 60.9 for a PFF grade is considered average. On their scale, 60 is average. So
generically, and if you go and you take the top 32 and take whatever the mean number is, it's a little bit above that. We did it on a 12 bloggers on all these offensive linemen. Yeah.
And I think he's fine. I don't think he's great, but I don't think he's nearly as bad as people think he is, because early on, he had some brutal games, Dave. This is the only player to my knowledge
that was horrible.
Where he had multiple games with a PFF pass blocking grade of 0. Not a reserve lineman, a starter. Just bonkers bad. But I think with Kevin O'Connell and Chris Cooper, they figured out how to minimize the deficiencies enough to make him a capable starter on a long-term basis. And I think that's a net positive. Now, if you find an opportunity, Dave, to get a great starting center, I think you take it. But the idea of extending Bradbury would be to give him just a little bit of extra cash and give you security at the position for a long time. Do I think it's a great move? No, but I would understand it. This would probably be my least favorite or least likely of all the extensions. But I think it matters that Lewis did write about it and did talk about it. And specifically the center quarterback relationship. It's very important. You're touching his butt, Dave. That's an important relationship.
No, and it's more about the fact that Bradbury calls the blocking.
Oh, no, I know.
Kirk Cousins.
Stole my joke.
But it's
that.
But that's where his skill's at. He's good at that. He's mediocre when it comes to pass blocking. He wins about half of it, and if there's big defensive guys over the middle, he loses half of it. That's his problem. And last year he regressed from his best year, which was the year before, Now, are we going to see anything better? We don't know. And as Daniel says, it also scares him that he has had a history of back injuries. So I would love a center like the Vikings sort of tended to have. You know, we've had good ones since the days of old, all the way up through, you know, to Sully or whomever. And Bradbury, you know, when we drafted him, I was excited about that because we needed a center. And then it never panned out. Yes, he was the Outland Trophy? The Remington Trophy that they win for best center. And he was that. But he cannot handle that power in the middle, has never been able to. He's a very, very good run blocker. But he hasn't, because he's fast and can move, and when we play that sort of style of run, it works. But it's the pass defense. Now, has he improved? Yes. He's learned a different technique, right? I've always talked about keeping your feet going when you're coming back. That's one technique. The other one is what he's adopted. Before, he would get pushed over and over leveraged and pushed back, or just flat out picked up and driven back. He can still happen. But when it comes to pass blocking, he's now using the speed bump style of technique where he plants, gets pushed to a certain level, and then releases his feet and goes back. It's a hopping sort of motion, and he goes back. But every time he gets pushed, it takes time. He hops back 6 inches, a foot, and then all that repeats, and it's slowing that defender coming in. He's gotten better, but he is by far not the best in the league at it. I hope for a stronger one. I hope Jurgensen, who we drafted, may become that in the future, and we don't have to worry about it after Bradbury's contract's up. We'll just slot Jurgensen in the middle.
Yeah, and this isn't one I'm going to advocate for, but I would understand it if the Vikings chose to kind of go that route. And I just wanted to at least paint the picture, because look, $5-ish million is nothing. I mean, he's the 12th highest paid center in football.
Yeah, they're grossly underpaid. The best ones are getting $13.5 million,
which is hilarious, because I think center's more important than guard.
Yes.
Center's more important than guard. Yeah, right now is like 13.5 million. Lloyd Cushenberry's at 12.5. The problem is people still think center is like an easily replaceable position. And like I think you can find them later, but I don't necessarily think they're easily replaceable per se. Like the Vikings have a history of finding centers late in the draft. John Sullivan, 6th round. Matt Burke, 6th round. Matt Burke could make the Hall of Fame. John Sullivan never quite reached those highs because of back issues. But I mean, if he would have been able to play another 8 years at that level, maybe you could have those conversations with him. So there's just a lot of intrigue here. All right, now let's go to the defensive side of the football, Dave, and we're going to stay on the defensive side of the football for the rest of our discussions here. Harrison Phillips. I think extending Harrison Phillips makes a lot of sense, but I think you have to do it at the right price. And I think you have to do it smart. Now, just looking at like the top 30 or top like 40 guys, they're all making 10 plus million a year. You have to really scroll down and over the Caps contract numbers to get to Harrison Phillips, where he's making $6.5 million average annual value per year, 3 years, $19.5 million, only $8.45 million guaranteed. I think he's going to get a decent raise from that. Not because his play has necessarily improved that much, but because inflation. And this is where inflation is just inevitable when it comes to the NFL. I do think that the Vikings are going to want to extend him super long term. This would strike me as like a 2-year deal, $20 million. You give him a little bit of a raise. He's not an elite player, but he's a very good, serviceable player that you can play in multiple spots and expect a relatively high level of output. Now, I use these numbers because you're top of the market. Chris Jones is a game wrecker. 31.75 million average annual value per year. Christian Wilkins just signed a massive deal. 27.5 million per year. Justin Madubuike signed a big deal. 24.5. Quinnen Williams, 24. Derek Brown, 24. Jeffrey Simmons, 23.5. DeForest Buckner, 23. Deron Payne, 22.5. Dexter Lawrence, 22.5. Nobody's going to put Harrison Phillips in those conversations. But would you say that he's worth about half as much as the end of those guys, that list? I think around $10 million is a completely fair price. Will Phillips want to stay for $10 million or test the open market? That's another question. Norris Fias makes a great point. Out of position last year, he's not a nose. He can play nose for you, but he is not a nose. And I said this earlier today on Purple Daily on Draft. He's better off in the B gap. He's better off as at as far inside as a 2-eye, 3 technique, 5 technique, 4-eye. Those are like kind of the sweet spot for a guy like Phillips because of his size and how he kind of plays the position. He's just not a big enough guy to play nose. But you know what? Credit where credit is due. He played relatively well when asked to be a nose tackle last year. So he's somebody you can bring in and have him do some of those things, but you don't want him doing it full time. Aaron mentions bringing in Akeem Hicks short term. I think Akeem Hicks is cooked, and that's why he's not under contract with anybody. The idea of Akeem Hicks that we are going to revert back to is him just absolutely dominating the Vikings offensive line for, 4 or 5 years. Those days are done. I would love that Akeem Hicks. That Akeem Hicks is incredibly valuable. He may be making over $20 million a year. But that Akeem Hicks doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately. Oh, he does, but his name is Chris Jones. So, yeah, Phillips.
All get older.
Mm-hmm. Phillips, 2 years, $10 million, $14 million guaranteed. Very similar to the contract Andrew Van Ginkel got. That's what I would expect him to get if the Minnesota Vikings decided to re-sign him or give him an extension, because he is a good, valuable football player who's versatile. And that versatility matters in this defense a lot.
He is. He's all around. I don't object to extending him over Bradbury.
I would extend him over Bradbury in a heartbeat. Like, I don't even know if I want to extend Bradbury, but I get it. That's why, and especially because one of the beat writers wrote about the possibility, I thought it was worth mentioning it and hashing it out. All right, we're going to move to the secondary for the last 3 guys on this list. Byron Murphy Jr. He signed a 2-year deal worth $17.5 million, 8.75 million average annual value, 8.1 million fully guaranteed. He's up for an extension. And I think if on the right terms, you give it to him because he's only 26. He's going into his 6th year, Dave. He's 26 years old. And with how valuable slot corners are becoming, if you have to put him as a slot-only guy because he just isn't able to hang on the outside anymore, I think that's not as big of a deal. Now, like the whole idea of Mike Zimmer is you can find cover 2 corners at 7-Eleven. Well, it's easy to find slot corners. It's hard to find outside corners and guys who are great at being able to thrive on the outside. And so far, Murphy's been good on the outside.
I disagree. You may be able to find slot corners, nickels, but finding one that could play the position well, that's rare. They don't exist that often. There isn't that many of them in the league. And once you find them, you want to lock them up. And the good ones are making top cornerback money now, which they should. They're close to it.
I would disagree. And let's point out some numbers. Keyshawn Nixon just got a deal from the Packers, and he was playing slot corner for him last year. He's also a really good returner, $6 million a year. Mike Hilton, one of the best slot corners in football, $6 million a year. Like these guys who are playing specifically in the slot aren't making big bucks. When you take a look at all of the top cornerbacks, money wise, Jair Alexander's the top paid corner. He's not a slot guy. I mean, I think he's a little overrated, but that's a whole nother discussion. Denzel Ward outside, Jalen Ramsey outside, Marlon Humphrey outside, Marshawn Lattimore outside, Trevon Diggs, L'Jarius Sneed, Jalen Johnson, Carlton Davis, Javarius Ward, Darius Slade, Jamel Jean, James Bradbury, all outside guys. Like slot corners, I mean, you're not paying them minimum money, but you're not paying big money for them. The most expensive slot corners in the league, Teron Johnson just signed an extension this offseason, $10.25 million a year. That's slightly less than 50% of what the top outside corner is making. Jonathan Jones, who can play outside, so I'm not counting him, but Kenny Moore's a slot guy. 3 years, $30 million. Like, so Byron Murphy is one of the highest paid slot corners, but he does play on the outside, and the Vikings use him based on their personnel packages on where to play. And I think that's not a bad thing, because if you have some like two guys in your nickel package who play better on the outside, you can put Murphy in the slot and feel comfortable about it. So, but if he's only a slot guy, his value does decrease. And I think that's important to note when we're having this conversation. To me, there's nothing in his profile that says that he's going to be worse on the outside moving forward, especially at the age of 26. I would definitely give him an extension. I'm careful about cornerback extensions because, as we saw with Xavier Rhodes, it's such a mental position. You can just start to suck. And that's awful. But it's also kind of the nature of the cornerback position. You can just all of a sudden start playing bad football, and there's not a whole lot you can do about it. Like, sometimes it just happens with those guys, and I would be careful paying him for too long or not giving yourself an out on those contracts. Like, even like guys like Jalen Ramsey and Denzel Ward, Jair Alexander, like, giving them 5-year deals to me is still scary, because what happens if all of a sudden they get a knee injury and they just, when they come back, they're just nowhere near as good? Then you have a $20 million albatross contract. Like, I would rather, I mean, cornerback in itself is a relative weak link position. Norris Fias talking about how he still misses Antoine. The Vikings do too. Yeah. Antoine rocks. But I always revert back to the 2021 Bengals. People make fun of Eli Apple, and deservedly so. He kind of brings it upon himself. But he was pretty good in that Super Bowl. He wasn't phenomenal, and he obviously allowed that final touchdown. But he was good for them throughout the year. And they had 3 solid corners, solid Bs at corner, including the slot. It was hard to pick on any one guy because they all played good football. And to me, I think that's more important than having an alpha. Because if you have an alpha, you can just go away from him and you can scheme around him. You can't scheme around 3 solid corners to where you're going to have troubles throwing at all of them at points in the game. Where if you have an A and a D plus, I'm just going to pick on Waswa Sarwanga for the next 60 minutes of football. You can't do that when you have a bunch of solid players. And I think that's the approach the Vikings are taking here. They have so much talent in the room, and nobody's going to deny that there's a lot of talent. It's the play on the field that's been the issue. The consistency, the staying healthy. It's not the talent. Murphy's loaded with talent. Evans is loaded with talent. Andrew Booth Jr. is loaded with talent. Same with Mekhi Blackman, Kyrie Jackson. Shaq Griffin's only 28. He's still got talent. It's about getting those guys to play well. That's the problem. It's not the ability in the room. So I think they're looking at it more of a volume approach at corner, which I do like. And especially if like one guy just, he stinks. Next guy up. And the next guy's got a bunch of talent and is not just a scrub that you found named Kindle Vildor. If you remember Vildor, he was with the Bears for a while and the Vikings picked on him a little bit. And I think that's an important thing. So I wouldn't overpay Murphy. I think like a 2 or 3 year extension, around $12 million, that would put him around like the 15th highest paid cornerback in the NFL. I think that's fine. I think what he brings you as far as the diversity of being able to play inside and outside and being consistent in those roles is incredibly valuable. I would give him a small extension, keep him in the building, and you know what? He can still go sign another extension before the age of 30. To me, I think that's the best play. And I will say, selling McCarthyism, the PFF grade I think is a little misleading. His film was really good. He was also playing against number one receivers constantly and held his own. So that's where like PFF is individuals grading plays based on I believe the scale is -2 to 2, and then that gets compiled into a formula, and then that spits out the PFF grade. And I'll say this, I do think that the PFF grade is a little misleading sometimes. Sometimes I think it's just fantastic. It's just like anything. PFF grades themselves are relatively objective and not subjective because it's a human being tallying all this stuff. So I would recommend
that they have at least 5 set of eyes looking at it.
Mm-hmm. And I would challenge you to go watch the film yourself and try and figure out, okay, why was the PFF grade bad? Why was it good? Are they right? Are they wrong? And I use it as a baseline guide. I don't use it as gospel. I do think that over the course of a large period, PFF is a very good data point. In a smaller sample size, like a 1 game sample size, I think it's less. It's not quite as good, just because it's one game. One bad play can skew things a lot. One great play can skew things a lot, which is why I always say, get NFL Plus, watch the All-22. Even if you don't know what you're watching, you'll learn by osmosis, and then ask questions of people that know more than you. That's what I do. I will take clips and I'll send it to people that know more than me and be like, hey, I'm seeing this. Am I seeing this right? And then we'll talk through it. So, hell, you can even do it with me. You can send clips to me whenever you want. But I do think that it's important with some of these guys to watch those. In the meantime,
also with the PFF system, besides being -2+2, it also affects how close to the play or effectual it was towards the play. If Murphy locks down a wide receiver on the left side and the quarterback throws a screen to the right, he did his job. He did it well, but it didn't affect the play whatsoever.
Yeah.
So he's probably going to get +0.5, and they go by half increments. He'll probably get a +0.5 on that. But if he locks down his receiver on the left and they screen to the left and he breaks off from his receiver and tackles the guy that caught it on the screen 2 yards behind the limit, line of scrimmage, he'll get a +2 for a grade on that one. He still did his job on both plays, but the grades are different because of how it affects on that individual play. And a lot of these guys, corners, are actually better than what their grades show because they're not being thrown at. They're the A player that you talked about, and the other team's throwing to the D player over on the other side. So they're not getting their good grades. They're doing the job, but they're not getting, hey, he scored a 90 in this game, right? They're not getting it because they're not getting the attention. The ball isn't going their way. And that's how PFF can be a little hard to understand for most fans. And it's all on how they grade.
Yeah, it's a very interesting kind of paradigm when you're having the whole conversation about PFF, because I think PFF's a wonderful tool. We've had many of their analysts on, great guys. But like any data set, you can't use it as your own gospel, and you have to look for outside sources. That's all we're trying to say here. Byron Murphy, I'd go 3 years, $36 million, guarantee about half of it, 18. I think that he's a very good football player. I think because he gives you that outside versatility, and being that you're essentially going to have him through his age 29 season, I think that you're still going to get high level play from him. And he's turning into a veteran on this team. He's spending time with UDFAs, coaching them up and helping them. I really like Murphy and think he brings a lot to the table and plays bigger than his size. So I think giving him a fringe, top 15 contract, I think is worth it. And being that you have some void years on his first contract, you can kind of play with some money and push it down the line, and you can be creative. I think bringing him back would be a great idea. Now, we got two more guys, and we're going to kind of group them together because, Dave, they play the same position. That is Cam Bynum and Josh Metellus. We're going to start with Metellus because I think Metellus is an interesting one here. He just signed an extension. Now, I will say the safety market is a little weird. Younger safeties with a lot of athleticism and ability are getting big bucks. Antoine Whitfield Jr. just got over $21 million a year, most ever for a safety. Derwin James at 19. Minkah Fitzpatrick's just over 18. Xavier McKinney got almost 17. Jesse Bates just over 16. Like, we're talking the young guys at the position are getting paid. Veterans are not. Justin Simmons is like a former All-Pro, and he doesn't have a contract right now. So these guys are viewed as relatively replaceable if you're not like an elite player at this point. So that's something to keep in mind here. But it's also fair to keep in mind that with Metellus, he way outperformed his contract last year. And when you outperform your contract that much, that's going to matter when you're sitting down at the negotiating table. And Metellus, 2 years, $8 million extension. That kicks in this year because last year was the final year of his rookie deal. Like, he outplayed that. He played over 1,200 snaps in 2023, and he was really good. He was so good and so versatile that they didn't necessarily know Next Gen Stats where to kind of put him as far as like position. So they created a spot called slot defender because he was just everywhere. And one of the reasons why you'd extend him is it's kind of a PR reason, Dave, and it's a locker room reason. Look, we just extended you, but you way outperformed your contract. So we're going to give you a raise. And is that something you want to do all the time? No, but when a guy that outperforms his contract, you could argue that Metellus is worth like $14 million a year. If you wanted to tell me that, I wouldn't necessarily fight you on it. I think it's a little less than that. I think he's probably worth in the neighborhood of like what Grant Delpit's getting, about $12 million a year. But as Northfield says, he'd be fine with a good faith raise for Metellus. And I think he would be good for the locker room because you've shown that, hey, you bring in Hawkinson, he dominates. You pay him. You take Justin Jefferson, give him a massive mega contract. You gave Josh Metellus a value, good faith like raise with that 2-year deal. Now you can do it again and continue to be one of the better organizations in football and win the PR battle with your players. Hey, you play well, you will get paid. And I wouldn't necessarily do a ton of money. I'd probably bump that up from $4 million to $8 million because at the end of the day, he did sign it and you can just enjoy the value from it. Plus, he's only had one season of it, so you have to be a little bit careful when it comes to having the discussion talks about Metellus because you'd like to be able to see a little bit larger of a sample size. But I think having him in the building for 4 years already tells you everything you need to know. And I think it's going to be a little less risky than having somebody come in, was really good for 1 year. Now you have to consider paying him again. That would be like the Sheldon Richardson thing, where the Vikings brought him in for 1 year, and then they got to figure out, hey, are we going to give this guy big money? What are we going to do? That is a lot harder than giving a guy like Metellus more money. So I would consider giving him a raise because he's been that good. He's been a leader for you. And not only has he been a leader for you, Dave, but he plays really good football. He had an interception, which to me is just still one of the better plays of the year, where he was in the A gap at the snap and sprinted back and intercepted Jordan Love 35 yards down the field. Just phenomenal stuff. And then there's Cam Bynum, who was drafted
with Metellus.
Okay.
You forgot the most important part.
What?
He is the Swiss Army knife of the defense for B-Flow. Flores uses him everywhere. You talked about how he lined up in the A-gap. He's rushed from every position on the defensive line. He's played linebacker. He's played nickel corner, and he's played safety. How many players have that much versatility in them and can do it successfully in the league? He's Everybody talks about a tweener. He's more than just a tweener. And yes, I agree with you. They should give him and say, hey, dude, you outplayed your contract. We're going to add, here's another 4 more per year. Be happy. And he'll get his second star on his captaincy. And the fact that he made captain made him so happy. No, keep it up. He seems to be one of those that lives on the praise and, hey, I can do this. And Flores is going to use him even more this year. So he deserves every dollar.
Yeah,
that's my
I do think he deserves every dollar, but we'll see if the Vikings are willing to give it to him. Yes, Robert Tonyan did sign a 1-year deal. Now let's talk about Cam Bynum, 4th round pick in the 2021 NFL draft. The Vikings didn't just get Justin Jefferson in the Stephon Diggs trade. Cam Bynum was the last piece of that puzzle. And Bynum has proven to be a good football player. He just did not have the athleticism to play corner at the NFL level. So the Vikings made him a safety. And it took him a little bit to acclimate, but he's proven to be a really good player. And all those instincts and abilities that he had at corner that he just wasn't able to do enough of on the outside because of the athletic limitations. Those limitations aren't there at safety, and he's thrived playing the position and playing next to Harrison Smith. A little up and down with what Ed Donatel asked him to do, but once Brian Flores got in the building, it was night and day. And Bynum is a player that I would want to keep on the team long term. I think he can be your next leader on the back end and take over that responsibility from Harrison Smith. Now, he's not Harrison Smith. He's not going to be that kind of dynamic, but he's going to give you a lot of really good play. He's rangy as a center fielder. He can come down and crash in the run, and he can do some of those versatile elements because he was a corner. You could even put him in the slot if you need to because of that experience. I would consider giving Bynum around $12 million a year. And I don't think that's an unfair mark. I don't think he's a truly elite safety. Like, you're not going to talk about him in the same realm as like a Jesse Bates or a Xavier McKinney, Minka Fitzpatrick, Antoine Winfield Jr. But you're going to talk about him in the realm of your Chauncey Gardner-Johnsons, your Justin Reeds, your Grant Delpits, your Marcus Williams. And I think that's where he would slot in contract-wise. I would do 3 years, $36 million. $18 million guaranteed, pretty much the same deal that I give Byron Murphy Jr. And as Northfield said, Hitman called Bynum a coach on the field. That's huge, especially in the back end, because you can see everything and you can maneuver things based on what you see because you have not a bird's eye view, but it's a much broader view than you would even at middle linebacker because of how people are positioned. So that, like, those are guys I think could be extended. I don't necessarily think all of them will. I don't even know if any of them will. I'd hope a few of them are. But when we're having these conversations with all that cap space, you got to spend it somewhere. And the best way to spend it is to keep your own guys because it's good for morale, it's good for continuity, and it's good to have talented players on your football team. So, yeah, that's the show, Dave. We're a lot of interesting stuff.
I think it's a great one. Good conversation. And yes, if you got good players still in their prime, still producing and getting better and better, you keep those.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. Do want to give a shout out to everybody. We passed 4,000 subscribers on YouTube over the weekend, which is a really impressive feat because we've only been around for 15 months. Thank you guys so much. Help us continue building the momentum for the best Vikings coverage around. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, even considering becoming a member and giving us a little bit of kickback. We're going to start doing either Wednesday or next week. I'm starting to take ideas for show topics, and we're going to start diving into those. If you are a member, you can see the post under the community tab. If you are not, you can't. So if you have ideas for show topics that you want us to dive into, become a member and you'll be able to jump into that. And who knows, we may have more time this upcoming season to be able to do some shorter shows. So you will not want to miss any of that. And if you're on the podcast side, we appreciate all of you too. And subscribe to the podcast. Give us a 5-star review, please. Give us a 5-star review. And I don't know, I will do something.
Brian, it could happen either way.
Yeah, we'll figure out some way to say thank you to you guys. Maybe we'll read them on air. Anybody who gives us a 5-star review and writes a nice little message for us, and just help us grow there too. Most of that is all free stuff, and it's incredibly appreciated. Until then, we'll see you on Wednesday, where I don't know what we're talking about yet, but we'll figure it out. I'm Tyler. He's Dave. SKOL Vikings, everybody.
SKOL Vikings. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell to get notifications. It helps us grow this community that we all love, our Minnesota Vikings. And on behalf of Tyler Forness and myself, Dave Stefano, thank you so dearly for watching the Real Forno Show. SKOL, everyone!